welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Our guest today is Usman Malik, author from Lahore, Pakistan, currently entering the metaverse from somewhere, I believe, in Florida. We'll ask him. Now, Usman has published an incredible story collection with the title Midnight Dreams, and it just came out in February 21, so in the middle of the pandemic or the third wave of the pandemic. The book was blurbed by a lot of famous authors and a friend of the show, Indra Pramit Das, who called Usman one of the best writers of horror and dark fantasy working today. And Indra says about Midnight Dreams, beautiful and unsettling debut collection. I have absolutely nothing to add. I was actually sitting here all day trying to come up with a more succinct way of praising Usman, and I couldn't. So that's why I'm reading Idra Rabbit Das. Usman is right here. Welcome to Second Life, to the book club, Usman Malik.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Draxter. It's very nice to be here. The book's title is Midnight Doorways.
Midnight Doorways. Oh
Yeah.
my God. This is incredibly embarrassing. I misread my own
It's
notes.
all right. It's all right.
Midnight Doorways. Midnight Doorways. Now look it up, usmanmalik.org, and order Midnight Doorways. It came from Pakistan. Usman, why is it not available in America and in Germany?
Well, so the funny you should ask. We are actually, my agent is pitching it to North American and European publishers. And well, I guess you'll be the first to hear this news. The book has sold to Hatchet India, so it'll be published in India in 2022. And we just sold it for Polish rights to Poland. And so it'll be translated into Polish in 2022 as well. And hopefully, with time, we'll have a North American and a European publisher.
That is awesome. And now, Midnight Doorways, I'm reminding myself, I was just, it's right here in front of me, and I cannot read my own scribbled notes. It's it's incredibly embarrassing. I think I have to print this out. Um, Now, we are here on a set that was built by Isabel and Ruby, both our trusted volunteers of the show. That has a little bit of a theme here with this little domed villa and kind of maybe reminiscent of the archaeological site that is mentioned in a story that we'll talk about later. But if the camera could zoom back a little bit and show us a little bit of the context here, because while I was reading your stories, Osman, I pulled um, some lines. The thing that I would add, and it's in some of the other blurbs, your language is just absolutely amazing. I'm a sucker for good language. I say this often. Sometimes books are incredible plot wise, but the execution is lacking for my taste. But in the language department, it's just beautiful. So we plastered some of these lines here randomly on the buildings. Here's one line that a protagonist says, "I love you, but I need to love me too." Um, Here's another one. Our world is not our own; it is borrowed. Sometimes it may be shared, even reshaped against the will of its possessors, but always for a brief interlude. Um, I don't know where the camera is, so this might be out of sync with what you see on YouTube. There are some when people are zooming out and looking straight down. There's one right next to the audience. In her heart was a steaming shadow that whispered nasty things. It impaled her with its familiarity. And a last one, the orphanage was our mother and father. Beyond its walls, who knew? So a whole bunch of stuff out of context, Usman. But my question really is about language. How important is language to you? Do you have a process? Do you have a special sort of focus on it where you would sort of self-assess that you may be more self-critical than others, or is there a process that you make sure you hone your language, uh, before you put that stuff out?
So language absolutely is important to me. When I was growing up, it I loved fast-paced narratives. I loved, thrilling stories. And I graduated from R.L. Stein to Christopher Pike and then Stephen King and Clive Barker. And as time
Oh,
went
very
on,
similar story.
yeah, and as time went on, I discovered that the beauty of the language, line by line prose, it really did matter to me. And in Pakistan and India, in South Asia, really, poetry is something that is really big. So
Hmm.
if you take an Uber ride in Pakistan and you start talking about poetry, the chances are the driver will be able to quote entire poems back at you.
Wow.
So it's just the way we are. It's I often tell people poetry is in the bone marrow of the Indian subcontinent and South Asia. So for that the poetics of language thus become an important thing for me to work with. And as time has gone on, I certainly do care about that, and my tastes kind of. For example, in horror, Ramsey Campbell and Clive Barker
Hmm.
really showed me how beautifully you could write horror, because Stephen King has a very avuncular, everyman sort of prose. But Campbell and Clive Barker kind of, they did a little bit more with their language. And we can debate about minimalism and maximalism all day long, but at the end of the day, it is what attracts you and what works for you. Language is a tool, in your
Absolutely. And
case.
minimalism can be good or it can be bad. It's interesting that you mentioned these authors. One thing that I always talk about is I was such a huge Conan fan, Robert E. Howard, and I just had this nostalgic thing like a couple of years ago. I go, I got to go back read Conan. I can't read it anymore. It's just pretty bad. I mean, just like you. I mean, I wanted fast-paced stuff, um, but now I want I want action and good plot, but I want it delivered in good language. That's all I want. Is that too much to ask for?
That's exactly right.
Um, now, research was done today by Shyla, and Shyla, if you hear me, could you send me the mind map slide? Because we prepared a slide where I put all the themes that I saw or felt that are important to you. I would just put it randomly. Um, on an image, and I'm just going to read it here. I don't have it in World right now, but the collection deals with disability. There's cosmic horror in there, uh, unconditional love. I wrote down religious violence, jealousy, home, guilt, family, snakes. Art, tradition, jealousy, and kindness, and I also put information war. So these are just sort of random themes, and there are 8 stories in there. Again, they are satisfying. They're to me they're beckoning to be read again at least twice, but they are challenging. So this is something that you're not shying away from, I guess, also to be challenging. I mean, is this something that you're concerned if they're too challenging?
Not really, because I feel like anything that people put out, anything that's meant to be revisited, literature that lasts for a little while at least. I think there have to be questions that you leave behind. There's a line in one of my novellas that people have quoted back at me: "All good stories leave questions." So
Hmm.
even if things sometimes don't make sense, it's part of what makes them fun, revisiting the idea again. Gene Wolfe is famous for doing that, as is Kelly Link. So yeah.
I wouldn't even say I hope I didn't come across as saying that they don't make sense. I actually feel that uh, they make sense, but you feel that they will make more sense and they will give you more. They will give you even more nourishment when you reread them. And some other stuff you enjoy. I mean, again, it's a very sort of basic thing of I guess fast food versus I don't know, a nutritious food or food that is just sophisticated. But if I use the term sophisticated, I know that this may be decoded by some as sort of elitist and not for me. What would you say to those folks who are like, yeah, I don't want. I mean, that's too complicated. I don't want to engage with it.
I think all stories find their own audience, and sometimes people are surprised by what they needed all along as compared to what they thought they wanted.
Mm. Um, Let me bring up a little quote here, and I hope the camera got the mind map. We got the mind map here. Let's bring the mind map back here. Information war. Do you know what I mean by information war, Usman?
When you say information war in the context of this book, I'm not sure what
Yeah.
you mean.
Okay, I'll tell you. Here's the this is gonna be a new game. Do authors know their own books, or do they know what readers read into them? We're like, oh my God, these weird readers, what do they read into them? What I mean is the story, the Wandering City, and I brought up the excerpt here, and there's a story about a city that appears and that apparently wanders all over the world and just sort of plunks itself down, and then people are really excited, and there's tourism going on. The city, uh, uh, in your story, arrives in Lahore, Pakistan, not without causing some damage. What I read in the story is that it sort of just lands there, and some people are even killed. And the response here, this is the excerpt. The response of the local population you describe as such: radio stations blare propaganda against the city of infidels, screaming, "Conspiracy! The jinn's an Israeli weapon! The siren's a Hindu plot against our pious boys!" The Fenta Sharia marchers fill the streets, while most of Lahore watches uneasily from the sidelines. Pseudo mullahs and goons storm the barricades. So basically, that's what I mean. Sort of outrage and something that happens and cannot be explained, like this huge floating city just coming out of nowhere, is being sort of weaponized by these various groups.
Absolutely. So, it kind of also sounds like maybe you're referring to the idea of social situations that are embedded in a text by intention or unintention. Does that sound about right too?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most fascinating thing of when we talk about writing versus movies, for example, or visual media, is that the world that I imagine in my head is completely different from the world that is imagined in any other reader's head and even in the author's head. And of course, the lens through which I interpret what you're writing about, and currently I'm reading a lot about the uh, I read about political stuff all the time, but right now I'm reading, for example, a book about how Nixon the Nixon era transition to the Reagan era, and all the implications. A huge 900-page book by Rick Perlstein, a noted historian, and there's a lot about sort of the or not the origins, but that era's weaponry of sort of political propaganda. And it's so interesting to read that and put it into the context of today, and you realize, you know what, this stuff has been around for a long time. Also, conspiracy theories, different religious groups sort of uh, grabbing onto a phenomenon, and so that's why I read that into this sort of tiny little blurb of a story.
Certainly.
Now, how do you define fable? Because your
Well,
book,
yes, no, please go ahead.
yeah, your book is fables from Pakistan.
Yes. So, when I first considered the term fable as part of the title, a friend of mine said, "Well, aren't fables stories where animals talk?" And I said, "Well, that's one variant of fable, but for me, a fable is a useful lie that tells the truth,
Hmm.
and it's a fiction that we create to propagate, well, an information war, I guess. um, and so, a fable is anything where you can put on a cloak and present something else that wasn't quite what people were expecting. And fables carry a particular power. They seem to tap into Jungian archetypes,
Yeah.
where our collective unconscious or subconscious is tapped into by the power of fable. It's almost as if telling a story sidewise can sometimes unmask nuances that other people never expected.
I brought up this slide here that I got from Wikipedia, and may I just remind Usman, your mouth is magic. You are actually an animal. You're a talking animal. I understand, Usman, at least in the context of the Second Life Book Club, and I there's a secret about your mouth moving. So I'm just teasing it without revealing completely how we pull the strings of these puppets. Here you go. So the slide that I brought up is from Wikipedia. A fable is a succinct fictional story that features animals, legendary creatures, plants, inanimate objects, or forces of nature that are anthropomorphized and that leads to a particular moral lesson. Um, so you were just saying the animals. I mean, you look at this much wider, not as narrow as a definition. But what about the moral lesson? Do each of these stories have a moral lesson?
I think looking at them from a moral lesson point of view would be too limiting for me as a storyteller. I tend to think of them as depictions of truth in a sideways fashion. And that is something that I have more fun with and more interest in exploring rather than imparting a particular moral allegory. When we get into the situation of morality and immorality, in the arts, then suddenly we're putting fetters on what we can or cannot do in fiction or art or literature of any sort. And so I don't know if I would think
Hmm.
of that as a moral lesson, but as more of a subversion of reality.
Hmm. Hmm. That is interesting because the moral, you don't want to be the arbiter of morality. You don't want to have sort of this final, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys type of binary um, conclusion,
Correct.
like Hansel and Gretel, where the witch is bad.
That's exactly right. And
In your
now
story, the witch would be an entrepreneurial genius, I guess.
in my story, the witch would probably be a very subtle character with her own ideas about how to eat children and why.
She would be a she would be a pioneering feminist of sorts, to saying, you know what, I'm not just a birthing machine. I do my own stuff. Um, Ava here in the local chat says a recipe book. She's a famous author of recipe books. I would say we talk a lot of theory, but let's have Usman read a little bit from his story. If you're just tuning in, this is the Second Life Book Club. Our guest is Usman Malik, and I understand you're in Florida in Clearmont, which is Scientology headquarters. Are you affiliated with Scientology? I don't know if I can ask you that and
No,
still remain
no,
alive.
I don't think so. I don't think I don't. This I think this is a different Claremont. This is a very small. This is a small town.
Ah, okay, okay. If you bump into a Scientologist, just tell him hi to call me. I need some advice how to start something big. The book is Midnight Doorways, Fable from Pakistan, and you can order it directly from Usman's website. And we're gonna hear a story. Usman, if I can ask you to stand up. We have a big book stand here that hopefully is big enough for you. Let me see. Just have to walk forward a little bit towards the stand. Here we go.
Hopefully, I
Perfect.
don't want to fall off.
No, this is great. This is great. This is part of the service package. Is us moving the book stand like this. And the story that we're going to hear is a story called Ishq. It's the first story in the collection. I- every story is really wonderful, but this starts off with such a big um, bang for me because I work with people with disabilities in the context as a filmmaker, and this deals with disability, deals with class, also living in exile, um, as you are right now in exile in the United States, deals with jealousy, guilt, illness, death. Uh, the main protagonist in that story has a disability and falls in love, and I shouldn't say the main protagonist, but one of the protagonists is disabled, and her sister does not understand why her disabled cripple sister has this lover, um, and she's driven by jealousy, and later she's driven by guilt. Before you read, Usman, I have a quick excerpt that I want to read here because this is so important. Ostracized by neighborhood children because of her sister's disability, young and enthralled by the secret, Ami, that's the able-bodied sister, kept it as a weapon she might yield. Cripple, cripple, yelled the boys at both of them, and Ami thought, mutant by association, that's what I am. So we're talking about these teenage girls where the able-bodied sister feels, yeah, like a mutant by association because of her sister, and she puts a lot of blame on her, and then it unfolds. What else do we need to know for this excerpt? Am I
I
giving too
think
much away?
not at all. I think you guys don't need to do know anything because I'm gonna start right at the top.
All right.
All right. So if we're ready, this is the story is called Ishq, which means love. Ishq. They whispered, Parveen is in love with the Shakargandi vendor. Figures, said the shocked neighborhood women. Fitting that the girl with polio, this 17-year-old with the face of an angel and the leg of a hobbled horse, who stood at her window every night staring into the ghostly depth of narrow alley, would steal glances at the bright-eyed boy with muscles sharp and confident in his back and a smile on his lips. When Hashim went with his basket of steamed sweet potato up the alley, yodeling at the top of his voice, Shakargandi wala, many a middle aged lady sighed dreamily and leaned out of a window to watch him go. Come taste my wares, his lilting young man's voice teased. Come take a bite of my sweet potatoes. And they wanted to go, wanted to take their drawstring purses, abandon the baby carriage in the hall with its shit stained linen, abolish all principles of a vaguely understood domesticity, and run screaming after the sing song boy. Wait! Oh, please wait! One packet of Yushakagandhi, please. Stay a moment, won't you? No, you're charging too much. Leave my alley now, you lying scumbag, but throw me over your shoulders and take me with you. Such sins that our daydreams are made of. The women watched the sweat of Hashim's labor trickle down the brown lobes of his exquisite ears, watched his bare chest shine with summer heat, and in the evening they'd gather in the cool, sprawling gardens in Mosque Wazir Khan and make fun of the boy. Who would ever go with him? They'd ask each other wide eyed and laugh nervously. Who would go with this lanky, young, beautiful fool who never stopped grinning? Seemly then that Praveen was the answer, the pale girl whose high, gloomy room looked down upon the alley from a dusty window. Every evening she leaned out, red and yellow bangles slipping down her willowy arms until they shone in the dark like jewels. They clinked above the din of the street, Kanak Kanak, a soul song borrowed from centuries of Punjabi lore, and the girl's eyes would be restless and lusterless until they riveted on the boy pedaling toward her house. Hashim's route was fixed. Each morning he biked down the alley, navigating the narrowest points on foot. Come dusk, he walked his bicycle up, smiling, yelling to laborers and shopkeepers returning home to try his shakargandi. He had a sweet, affecting voice, and when he was not hawking his merchandise, he sang Sufi love verses that pealed in the night like bells. रांझा रांझा कर दी हुण मैं आपे रांझा होई. Everywhere I turn, I see Ranjha. So long I've chanted Ranjha Ranjha, I've become him myself. Call me Ranjha, sisters. Don't call me Heer no more. Carefully he decorated his wicker basket with shakargandi. Blossoms of sweet potato wedges sat skewered on toothpicks ringed with slices of lemon, a presentation to tempt the most jaded taste buds, and the people of Narrow Alley responded. They gathered around, waited for him to sprinkle chaat masala over their perches, and munched the shakargandi all the way home. It was on one such night when the boy clattered down the alley, good naturedly tinkling his bell at pedestrians, that he happened to glance up into the mounting black. A stick figure stared down at him, circlets of light at its wrists. Their eyes met, the bangles chimed, a new dark surged, and the sweet potato vendor of Narrow Alley never looked away again. I'm going to stop here for this one.
And that's Usman Malik reading from Ishq from Midnight Doorways. And this is just a beautiful story because I don't want to give away, but the unconditional love between these two young people is really inspiring. But you can also look at I mean, the understandable jealousy of the able-bodied sister, where she just does not understand why her sister is basically catching this guy, that good catch. Um, Usman, you can sit back down. Thank you very much.
Okay.
This is my headmaster attitude. You can sit back down, Usman. Good job reading.
I
Uh,
don't know how to go back.
Look, Usman is wandering around. This is part of the book club tradition where the authors don't know how to get back to their seat. You just have to turn around and then click on the chair, and then you'll be seated.
So I turn
Uh,
around like that. Okay, there we go. Now I know where I'm
yeah,
at.
yeah. And meanwhile, actually, I forgot earlier the camera. If the camera could look around a little bit, because another part of the presentation of the book is actually there's just amazing artwork in there as well from various artists, and we put it out here. Ruby put those illustrations out. Just amazing illustrations. You see the two lovers here on one. You see a kind of disturbing head that is almost drowning. You see the wandering, floating city. You see a snake monster, um, and some other things here. A person with two heads, whatever that means. Uh, oh, Shyla is asking here in the chat, what made you decide to include these illustrations in the book? I mean, I'm assuming that you put it all together, also in terms of presentation.
We did. So basically, I've always loved books with illustrations. I feel like it's such a pity that we've moved away from illustrated books in mass paperback and hardbacks
Yeah.
generally in bookstores. And in any Eastern tradition and in the Western too, but specifically in the Eastern Islamic tradition, manuscripts are said to be illuminated. The term is illumination. So these handwritten manuscripts with beautiful calligraphy and beautiful fonts and gold, gilded edges, that's part of our culture. So when I wanted to do a book, I wanted really to kind of harken back to that idea, as well as books by Edmund Dulac, like classics, like
Hmm.
Arabian Nights or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, or Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Mystery and Imagination. And on all those classics, you'd have Arthur Rackham or Edmund Dulac do beautiful illustrations, which I loved. So I wanted my readers, especially in Pakistan, where we just don't get this kind of stuff at all.
Hmm.
Pakistan does not have a lot
What do you
of
mean importing it from the West, or these
well,
books?
we don't have local writers doing illustrated books,
Ah, okay.
which are of this sort of, especially in English, because most of Pakistan still reads in Urdu. We do read in English, but a lot of people are probably more comfortable in regional languages still. So I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to have this thing. If I were writing in English, I wanted Pakistanis to have access to the same sort of beautiful illustration that I really pined for.
Mhm. Is that a function of um, to my shame, I have to admit you're only the second author from Pakistan. Avais Khan was here a few weeks ago. The second author from Pakistan. What was interesting is that he was talking about the industry, how it is really, I don't know what words he used, but basically very underdeveloped publishing industry in Pakistan, vis-a-vis India and of course the West.
Um, I'm sorry. I think I missed the crux of the question. What was the crux of the question?
Is would you also say that the Pakistani publishing industry is very much underdeveloped as compared to India, as compared to the West?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But we have to take that with a grain of salt in the sense that remember a lot of Pakistanis history. So English books in English are have historically been much more expensive than books in regional languages. You see, so the publishing industry organically evolved to cater to audience who read in. For example, when I was a child, 30, 40 years ago, we could find books for like less than a penny.
Hmm.
And I could read those books and I could read them on and on because they were so cheap. But this was not true for books in English. They were always like, if one book was 5 rupees, the book in English would be 200 rupees or something like that.
Wow.
So the difference was so big that I think the industry and the publishing industry as well kind of evolved to the regional language publishing industry is very rich. In English, yes, we do not have much of a publishing industry.
Hmm. That's interesting, and that's probably then also the reason why the local authors of the books published by local authors are not published in editions that would cost more to produce, because maybe the publishing industry thinks people are so used to not paying that much for it, so they wouldn't pay more even if it were illustrated nicely, I guess.
Correct.
Mhm. Um, in terms of Fable, I forgot to ask well, I kind of did, but in terms of the in terms of the origins of some of these stories, are they? And I think maybe I read this in an interview with you, or you said this somewhere, but uh, are are they based on traditional sort of legends and stories that you heard? What's the connection with that? I mean, in one you mentioned, I mean, there's a reference to the Birdman, for instance, which is more, I think, a Persian sort of fairy tale. But are there other sort of legends that you riff on or update, or how is the relationship between that tradition and your original stories?
So I'm right now reading Children of Dune, which is the third book in the Dune series, and there's a very interesting thing in I don't want to give spoilers to people who haven't read it, but the idea is that one of the characters is the repository of the memory of the entire memories of his and or her predecessors.
Hmm.
So if people who read Dune know exactly what I'm talking about, but people who haven't, it's just the idea is this person has access to genetic memories. I tend to think of people like me, writers who stand on the threshold of the East and the West by dint of our reading habits or our chosen language to express our self in, as
Hmm.
people who are borrowing from traditions that have stood there stolidly for centuries and or millennia,
Hmm.
and till someone like me comes along and tries to steal them, like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and claiming it as their own.
Hmm.
And so what I do is I am a magpie of stories. In Pakistan, wherever I hear so the a story in Ishq about the girls about the girl in narrow alley. This narrow alley is actually a real place in Pakistan.
Hmm.
So my dad, when I was in Florida at that time, my dad was visiting me here, and he told me this story about narrow alley. And I won't give you the spoiler, but there's a story about a beast, about a cow that's pushed into this alley that is so narrow that people can only cross it by walking sideways.
Hmm.
And this imagery of people of a place, an alley so narrow that people had to walk sideways, was so thrilling to me. So it's similar stories like this kind of just get into my head, and I just have to use them in some way or another.
But you're putting it in a completely different context. I mean, that alley is not. It's a really cool image in that story, but it's not the core. sort of gist of the story or what's happening. It's one sort of set piece, I guess. So you're saying you're stealing different things, the magpies flying all over the place, stealing these things, and then building a really kind of shiny nest out of these things, where the things themselves maybe are not even recognizable that much anymore, where they came from.
It's yeah, and Damon Knight, the great grandmaster of science fiction, he once said that if you insert Easter eggs in your stories, do it so cleverly that if someone who knows it comes along, they will squeal with pleasure. But others who will not recognize it, it won't matter to them. They will just
Mm.
enjoy the story and the story's own merits. And I think that's what I do specifically for Pakistanis and South Asians. Sometimes they'll recognize things and then they'll be so excited and they'll email me about it.
I mean, I certainly didn't ask this question to sort of put you on a spot and say, you're stealing, famous Pakistani fables, and then you're just updating them and claiming them they're original. I think that it's uh, nobody's operating in a vacuum. But what the reason why I'm asking this question is, did you consider at one point um, to add, because I could see that another writer or another publisher, maybe a publisher, would ask to add a reading list at the back or some sort of notes that draw the line to the origin, if there were an origin of a fable. Let's say I do a thing, and I riff on Hansel and Gretel. Um, then maybe my publisher would gently force me to, not because they're afraid of getting sued or anything, but just as a sort of a cultural context, to put that in the back of the book.
Yeah, I don't think that I draw from the fables in such a way that there would need to be a kind of an etymological tree. But some a lot of the myths that I do end up borrowing are so well known that they've sort of become like kind of they have become generic and sui generic at the same time.
Hmm.
So I don't think that they would need. I mean, people from South Asia would recognize all these. It's kind of like me taking a werewolf trope, right?
Hmm.
Everyone knows a werewolf trope, but it would be me just taking a local werewolf trope and making it my own.
Yeah, but Westerners like myself, Usman, we don't know anything. We can't. We don't even remember the third sequel of Dune, where Frank Herbert got increasingly more devious in his depiction of sexuality. Some would say he let his inner pervert fly, but we're not talking about Frank Herbert here. Now let's move to another reading here. Oh, here's one thing that I actually wanted to ask you, because you work in the medical field. I believe you're a doctor.
I am. I'm actually on call right now, so I'm
Oh my!
sneaking. I'm sneaking answers to my pages in the middle.
Don't forget to let the puppet's mouth move, though, because we need puppet's mouth move. That's part of the lore in the Western world. So my question is is there any connection with your quote unquote day job and the way you depict these stories, or that you're drawn to certain things? I mean, there are some, here with polio, with disability, then when she gets sick. Later, I think you're going to read from the story of what is it called, resurrection points, um, that has a medical angle on it. Is that something that interests you?
Sometimes it does. I do tend to borrow from medical lingo and medical stories once in a while. So speaking of which, as you said, this story, there's an interesting story behind this story. I was at the Clarion West Writers Workshop with a bunch of writers, and Neil Gaiman was there with us that week. And I was sitting, at this dinner with Neil and a bunch of my friends, and I was telling this story that when I was 18 years old, I dissected my first cadaver
Hmm.
because I went to med school when I was 18 and a half or something like that. So E. Lily Yu, my friend, I often tell the story and I really enjoy telling it. E. Lily Yu turns to me and says, "Write a story with that as your first line, and I'll read the hell out of it." And I took that as a challenge and I wrote it. and that story I workshopped with Joe Hill um, next week, and so
Hmm.
that ended up becoming Resurrection Points. And some of Resurrection Points is pretty much I basically just described what I exactly did.
Wow. Why don't we then? Okay, then let's switch it up since we're talking about Resurrection Point. Then I would ask you to get up again and let's bring up the book display again here and let's read a little bit from Resurrection Point. Let me find the book display. Is one of my assist. Oops, there is no book on it. Can my assistant here in the audience please bring up the book? But it's I think these are two linked objects. There is a stand and a book. They have to be relinked. Yeah, great, awesome. Now, let's read from Resurrection Points, Usman. So I have to ask you to get up again. I
Okay.
know this is very strenuous, but you're also um, very athletic werewolf. So, or wolf, white wolf. This story is very dark. There is violence in that story. There's terror uh, against religious minorities in that story. So it's just a very sort of real background. I think we talked about this briefly. Do you think it makes sense in some contexts to put in front of the book a I guess people call it trigger warning. I don't really like that word. But what do you think before we start reading? What is your opinion about warning people of certain subjects that are very sensitive that may not be for every reader.
um,
Sexual abuse, violence.
Sure. Well, that's it's a very controversial subject because we just don't have enough data on it to actually say how it matters in the long run. What we do know is there was an article in the New Yorker about this just a few months ago. There is accumulating evidence that trigger warnings or content warnings actually end up damaging people who you're trying to protect more than they protect them. I am sort of a neutral. I'm moderate about it. I have no issue letting my students in med school or in my writing class, either one. I will tell them, hey, this is a story about rape. We're going to be talking about this, but I'm certainly not going to give people an option to say no, no, no. This is not something I want to do at all because I personally think life is not going to give us any trigger warnings before it crashes down on us. So I think it's the simulation of a catastrophe or the simulation of something like that can be actually helpful, not harmful. And I say that from a medical perspective. However,
Mm,
having said that, I absolutely believe that anyone who's gone through, say, sexual assault or something, they have the right not to talk about that. And if that is something that someone is not interested in, I will tell them, listen, my content, I'm probably not going to adapt that just for you, but I will give you the option to not be involved in that particular portion
right.
of it. And if there's any damage whatsoever that could potentially happen, I'm going to be there for them, and I will be there after with them, and help with whatever I can in both my professional and in my writerly capacity.
That's very well put. I just wanted to make sure that people understand where I'm coming from. I'm certainly not, nor would I ever advocate for censorship of art and written materials. However, I do feel, and I worked in social psychiatric institutions for a while in my civil service, and then afterwards, um, it's a long time ago. But my wife is a social worker, and we often talk about people who are intensely traumatized. And I do think that there is value in um, putting a little blurb in the front of the book. It could be sort of very sort of subdued, uh, where it would say this book deals with sexual violence, genocide, or what have you. Um, there might be, I don't know, but I'm open to discussions about that. I don't have any data about the the pros and cons about that. I know from personal experience that there are people who are traumatized and have severe psychological issues um, a friend of mine who I talked about with Infinite Jest, which deals with people with psychosis, she says, "No, I don't want to touch that at all, because that's going to trigger, my time when I was dealing with schizophrenia." And but on the other hand, some other people who dealt with schizophrenia, let's say, may actually welcome being sort of exposed to characters who are dealing with it. It may be healing, like you're suggesting, Usman. So I think it could very well go both ways. No?
I think I agree with you 100, which is why I said that if I start getting into a subject, I am not going to remove the subject at all.
Yeah,
I will tell people this is what we're going to get into, and we are going to talk about this, and this is the situation. But I don't believe in censoring material um, uh, to
absolutely.
to cater to pretty much anyone. That's including, for example, as a Muslim, I want to be able to talk about uncomfortable aspects in my religion, because if I don't, someone else will. And so, I feel like those are things that we have to tackle one way or another in real life, or on paper. And what better preparation for real life than a safe simulation?
I completely agree with it. This is really well put. Jessica in the local chat says life has no trigger warnings. That's brilliant. So Jessica, I want you to make a T-shirt here in Second Life, and you can wear it next time here at the next week at the Second Life Book Club. If you're just tuning in right now, this is Usman Malik talking about his book Midnight Doorways. It's a collection of his stories that have been published before in various magazines. Absolutely astonishing stories with in a wonderful presentation. Now, Usman, you have to turn to the right 90 degrees and walk forward to the book display, um,
Okay, so turn
or
right. All right,
or you will
there we
never
go.
be invited again to this program. There
I
you
don't know.
go. No,
There we go.
you,
Ah.
I should have issued a trigger warning. Ruby, can you move? I think you have to link the objects. I'm sorry, the book is not linked. She's moving it. Just stay right there. And the book is magically moving into position. And now we're going to hear from Resurrection Points. Um, Amazing story. Do we need to know anything?
Nope, I'm going to start right at the top. All right, so this story is called Resurrection Points. I was 13 when I dissected my first corpse. It was a fetid, soggy teenager that Baba dragged home from Clifton Beach and threw in the shed. The ceiling leaked in places, so he told me to drape the dead boy with tarpaulin so the monsoon water wouldn't get at him. When I went to the shed, Dead Boy had stunk the place up. I pinched my nostrils, gently removed the sea blackened aluminum crucifix from around his neck, pulled the tarp across his chest. The tarp was a bit short. Ma had cut some for the chicken coop after heavy rainfall killed a hen, and I had to tuck it beneath Dead Boy's chin so it seemed he were sleeping. Then I saw that the fish had eaten most of his lips and part of his nose, and my stomach heaved. After a while, I felt better and went inside the house. How's he look? Said Baba. Fine, I guess, I said. Baba looked at me. You all right? Yes. I looked at Ma rolling dough peras in the kitchen for dinner, her face red and sweaty from heat, and leaned into the smell of mint leaves and chopped onions. Half his face is gone, Baba. He nodded. Yes. Water and flesh don't go well together, and the fish get the rest. You see his teeth? No. Go look at his teeth and tell me what you see. I went back to the shed and peeled the pale lip flesh back with my fingers. His front teeth were almost entirely gone, sockets blackened with blood. The snail like uvula at the back of the throat was half missing. I peered into his gaping mouth, tried to feel the uvula's edge with my finger. It was smooth and covered with clots, and I knew what had happened to this boy. So, Baba said when I got back. Someone tortured him, I said. Behind Baba, Mama sucked breath in and fanned the manure oven urgently, billowing smoke away from us toward the open door. How do you know? Baba said. They slashed his uvula with a razor while he was alive, and when he tried to bite down, they knocked out his teeth with a hammer. Baba nodded. How can you tell? Clean cut. It was sliced with a blade, and there are no teeth chips at the back of the throat or stuck to the palate to indicate bullet trauma. That wouldn't be the only sign of bullet entry. Not bad, though. Baba looked pleased. He tapped his chin with a spoon and glanced at Mama. You think he's ready? Mama tried to lift the steaming pot, hissed, let it go, and grabbed a rough cotton rag to hold the edges. Now? I was his age when I did my first. Baba looked at me. You're old enough. Eat your dinner. Later tonight, I'll show you how to work them. We sat on the floor and Ma brought lentil soup, vegetable curry, raw onion rings, and cornflour roti. We ate in silence on the meal mat. When we were done, we thanked Allah for His blessings. Ma began to clear the dinner remains, her bony elbows jutting out as she scraped crumbs and wiped the mat. She looked unhappy and didn't look up when Baba and I went out to work the dead boy. I'm going to stop here.
And that's resurrection points. Yeah, that is goes right into it. These guys, this family are dissecting dead bodies, and then we don't know what they do with them. Well, I do, but you got to read the story, folks. Uh, Also, you're setting sort of the surroundings here as this fair. It becomes pretty clear right away that they're a poor family, right? They're
Correct.
not. Um, Sorry, I'm moving the book stand, and you can sit back in my controlled environment where I can tell people to stop and stand. So this story deals with um, violence against Christians here in this context, and how important is it to you this depiction of sort of these class differences? I mean, again, this is I don't know how to formulate this question. I'm just very impressed how we are talking earlier about minimalism and maximalism. The language is poetic, the language is precise, and the language is beautiful, but it's fascinating with very little you immediately sort of paint this um this world this the world of struggle, of financial struggling vis-a-vis the surrounding world of not riches but um just these class differences with very little words, I feel.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Is that something where where you feel you should do more or you should do less? I mean, I guess the question is, how do you know how much is enough?
So language and word
Because I'm
building.
sorry to jump in here again, because to paint exact this picture for people who are outside of this world, for me, I grew up in Germany. I lived in America. I live in Germany. I live in America. I've never been to Pakistan. I saw pictures last time with the Vice. We discussed the enormous differences between rich and poor. I mean, they're also existent in America in the big metropolitan areas. But the slums that I've seen in Pakistan and other places, they're still to me visually worse than in America, to be honest.
Yeah, so poverty is often defined by different economic parameters, right? So one of them is $1 a day. I don't know if that's changed, but when I was growing up, if you earned less than $1 a day, you were considered poor on a
Mm,
global level. So think about it. That's $30 a month. $30 a month is what so many billions of people survive on. And if they do, they're considered poor. $30 a month. That I spend $30 on a couple meals in the US in one day. So, I mean, I'm just giving you an example of how different how staggering the difference in poverty and its definition in different parts of the world can be, how discrepant it can be. Um, so when we do world building in any story or novel, it's really up to the writer, because you're using world building as a tool to move the story and give you immerse you in this particular space, into this particular world, but at the same time keep things moving. So it's always a balance. You just gotta choose your you just gotta wield your world building like a proper tool,
Mhm.
and not get lost in it, and or just choose the right details.
I guess what's also interesting, because I mean, this has to do with your target audience. If you want to depict this as sort of a social critique of a social system, then you may go into more detail. But here you're following sort of a different goal, maybe also for a different audience. Is there any moral from this particular story? I know you don't want to be pinned down, but I do need to know.
Well, there is no moral to this story. The story is just basically it's the depiction of a world that I have lived through myself.
Hmm.
The story, the premise of the story is about this burning of a minority neighborhood in Pakistan way back in, I don't know, 2011 or 9 or something like that. And I remember vividly this idea that this entire community, people, these mobs went and they burnt this neighborhood down. And that was the story. Really talks, I mean, you get the story gets into that, and that's a real thing that happened back then. And so I wondered um, what would happen if we had a boy who had necromantic powers
Hmm.
around when something like that happened.
Because then yeah, well,
Exactly, we'll give up
I'm
the
not gonna
spoiler.
say it because I'm gonna spoil it. Yeah, but that's brilliant. I mean, that's I get a sense of your own unique style, how you're coming up with these things. That is very cool. Shyla just sent me this slide. I just want to put it up real quick. And again, um, this is Lahore, and just sort of random pictures of homes for sale, and then some of the slums. And there is uh, a terrorist attack here. There's you see this might be a local policeman who is pushing away the camera, and this is just sort of decontextualized. But I find this interesting, and you know, let me make clear, I could put a picture of this up with some homes in Beverly Hills and the downtown uh, area of Los Angeles, where you drive through miles and miles of tent cities. So these disparities between rich and poor are not unique to this part of the world at all. That's not the point, but I find it really, really interesting how people from your part of the world, Usman, are weaving that into the story. Um, one quick excerpt here from a story that deals with a child bride that I pulled. Um, this protagonist finds out that um, the guy who he's interacting with is actually married to a has been married to a girl that was sold to him when she was 8 years old. And the narrator says here, I could see his love for her nestled in the crow feet around his eyes. I could see his entire life in those eyes, feeding her, clothing her, raising her, falling in love with her, sending her to college, but he had bought her with rupee. Her heart, did he win it or chain it with need? Now, this goes back to the mind map where I just put these keywords down like family and tradition. Is this still a thing? Child brides and girls being sold to older men?
So I think that happily most of Pakistan most of South Asia has moved away from it. But once in a while, we are hearing stories emerge from rural areas. It's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to stereotype it, but in the U.S., in certain southern states, or even in certain midwestern states, you'll see certain weird things happen in families with with child brides, in Christian communities, or I mean,
Absolutely. In
I think
Kentucky, you can actually get married at the age of 13, I think, legally.
That's
People can
exactly right.
verify that. So again, Usman, just for the record, I'm not here like a Westerner sitting like, what's going on in your developing thing? You guys have societal standards that we have. I mean, this is not something that is confined to any area. It would be absurd. There's a lot of Americans who like to believe that civilization that this is the center of civilization when they talk about South America, for instance, and that's of course absurd. But sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, it's very rare, but we do still see this once in a while. And we certainly recently there was a case where there were feuds between two tribes in southern Pakistan, in this rural area, massively rural area. And as part of the agreement to cease fire was this agreement to, I think, marry or gift one of the daughters or something. And it created a whole ruckus in the media, and then I think the thing kind of calmed down. But
Mhm.
yeah, we are seeing some tribal traditions still linger on. And yeah, so I do think this probably happens. I would not be surprised at all if doesn't happen in several places in secrecy.
Mhm. We are out of time. Usually we go into the post game right now where we stop the streaming, but in the last few months we just kept streaming and basically rolled the post game into the main show so then actually people can also watch it later on YouTube. So I think we should do that. So we give the last 30 minutes to the entire world and not just to this elitist core here in world. One of the stories that I really like that stayed with me that is also tough is a story with the title Vaporization Enthalpy of a Peculiar Pakistani Family. What does enthalpy mean?
So vaporization enthalpy is it's the process. It's the process through which solids turn into liquids and liquids turn into vapor.
Hmm.
So the vaporization enthalpy of a peculiar Pakistani family, by I mean literally, it would mean how they go from solid to liquid and then just vaporize into the air.
Hmm.
And it's a story about. I mean, I can. The premise is the story starts with a drone attack, so that should kind of give you an idea of what the story is trying to do.
Hmm. And it's about and at the end you're right and that reminded me because it was buried in my memory that the story is dedicated to the 145 innocent victims of the Peshawar attack, and that was a school massacre um, in 2014 that was perpetrated by the Taliban in a I think in a military academy, and there was a hundred. Well, you right, 145 people were killed there, and I remember this. Now, when I read the name, we were we were glued to the news, and they were basically in that school for a number of days, I believe.
They were there for several hours, and
Oh.
in those several hours, yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing that we should probably give a trigger warning about, because it was a brutal massacre. I mean, I was in Pakistan when that happened. I was actually about to fly back to the US. I was at the airport. Well, no, this was a night before I was supposed to fly out, and it was very difficult. I mean, I was at the airport with tears going down my cheeks as I watched the news. So it was a tough thing.
What are you trying to say with the story? I mean, this is a story that is mysterious. I don't pretend to understand it, and I actually don't think. I mean, it's like a good piece of modern music. People know that I'm a musician, and when I was in college, I was the only one in my class who enjoyed 20th century classical, Lutoslavsky or Penderecki and other people. That's just noise. That's crazy. I don't understand what is he trying to say. So this story stays with me, although I don't know what you are trying to say, and I'm going to read it at least one more time, if not twice, because there is. I'm not sure if the sister's brother is a suicide bomber or the mother was. Is that relevant to you when I ask you like, Usman, what's going on? But it resonates so deeply with me. It really I woke up this morning thinking about this story. So I guess you've done a good job. Um, but yeah, is it important that I understand what's happening?
Not really. It's kind of like I was saying earlier. I hope that all good stories leave questions, and it's a story that I have heard from many, many people. They've revisited it. It's made people cry. It's
Yeah.
made people write to me in anger and frustration. When it first came out, it won the Bram Stoker Award. So in Pakistan, in the news, it kind of came out. It broke that the story won the Bram Stoker. So lots of people read it. It kind of went viral, and then I started hearing from people who told me, accused me of being anti-Pakistani, and then there was another group that said I was anti-American or anti-Western, and I was
Oh
like,
boy.
so it was like people on all sides very unhappy or angry with the story, and
This is crazy.
um,
I don't see this at all. I see this as a deep meditation on the nature of what it means to be a human. I mean, this is what it really goes to the core of who we are as human beings, as a society. How do we relate to each other? Uh, oh God, this was. How do you deal with these kind of accusations? Can you brush that off, or you get mad?
oh no, I ignore everyone. I
You
mean,
don't go on Facebook and Twitter and
no,
for days
no,
and yell at
not
people?
at all, not at all. I believe in really avoiding that sort of a spiral. I try to be very stoic on social media when it comes to criticism, because then you're just inviting a spiral of bad feeling, and a bad taste in your mouth. I just ignore criticism, and I think writers really should. As an artist, it's our job to express ourselves, and
Yeah.
as the audience or the reader, it's your job to express yourself. So artists should really not put themselves in a position where they're arguing with what their art means. They should let any reader express what they want to, and you can just block them, right? I mean, if it's someone who's being belligerent towards you, or getting personal, or writing you email, just ignore them and block them.
I should learn that. Maybe you can charge me for a course before next time I tweet at Sanjay Gupta that he shouldn't have gone on Joe Rogan's show. That was a mistake. But that was actually an interesting tweet. It got a good reaction. Of course, a lot of Joe Rogan fans told me that I was a loser, but that's okay. I can live with that. Now, another story before we go to the last reading. This is a wonderful story. Uh, in the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, and I probably mispronounced this again. Now, tell me what Mohenjo-daro is. I'm throwing up a few slides. This is an actual site in Pakistan, an archaeological dig site of where the ruins of a huge, I guess, city was discovered. And in your story, you sort of put a cosmic horror um, context into this real existing site. But what is Mohenjo-daro?
So Mohenjo-daro and Taxila are part of the ancient Indus Valley civilization. Along with the Sumerians, the Mesopotamians, the Incans, and the Mayans. These are very ancient. The Indus Valley is probably as old as the Mesopotamian civilization,
Hmm.
5,000, 6,000 years old. And so Mohenjo-daro is a site in the southern Pakistan where we discovered this entire city that was preserved and that was covered by whatever trick of faith. And so we know a little bit about the city. We know a little bit about the architecture, and the word Mohenjo-daro means mounds of the dead. And the
Mm,
city, the city itself is kind of shaped as if they're like tons of mounds and platform houses, and they're
hmm.
like tunnels, and with an amazing ancient irrigation system and a sewage system that is quite brilliant, actually, probably better than many modern Pakistani cities. And so Mohenjo-daro was discovered, I don't know, a couple of hundred years ago, 200 years ago, something like that. And yeah, so I was curious about some of the tales
So this is
in
a
the story.
no-brainer. Sorry to interrupt. I'm throwing up these slides in the back. This you can see here the irrigation, the canals a little bit. and here's a wide view. So I guess for you as somebody who loved Lovecraft and Clive Barker, it's kind of a no-brainer when you look at this and go like, wait a minute, of course the ancient ones lived there or whatever.
Indeed.
Wow. And this also has a an aspect of sectarian violence in there. You throw that in there. It's also something where, okay, this is getting too granular because the audience hasn't read the book. If I'm here like the super fan asking you, what, why does she show the boy her scars on her collarbone? What does it mean, Usman? People don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Eh,
I think I'm gonna probably let them read it, but it's it's a moment where two people share secrets with each other,
Yeah.
and she's trying to talk to him about his secret. So she says she has a secret.
Awesome. Last reading for the day, we can also take audience questions. Let's bring up the book display, please. My volunteers here who are hidden in the audience, and this is from a short story called "City of Red Midnight." And again, this also has a little bit of a cross-cultural setup. In the beginning, these protagonists they arrive in Lahore for the Lahore Comic Con. And what I found actually hilarious is that they discuss, I believe, still at the airport, they talk about how has imperialism influenced popular culture. Um, Actually, let me ask you that question: how has imperialism influenced popular culture? And a little bit, and I like I ask this a lot. Is this something? I mean, you apparently grew up, or you're fluent in these worlds because you work in America, you travel. Um, do you feel that that it's oppressive American culture to you as an artist, that you have to adhere to certain norms of presentation and plot and all that?
It can be. American literature certainly has become hegemonic in certain ways.
Yeah.
Hollywood has become hegemonic in certain ways of movie making. But I think at the end of the day, America still is the country that has taken the literature of so many countries and made it her own. So I think it kind of goes both ways. If I had not come to America, I would not have discovered many, 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 many brilliant artists. Um, and to be fair, Pakistani state hasn't exactly done a lot to promote arts, anyways. So the organic growth of art or literature in Pakistan, despite suppression, is another fascinating thing. It's kind of like
Mhm.
in Russia or in Brazil, or in Spain even. People talk about Clarice Lispector being one of the great countercultural artists who was also um, banned for a little while. So I think for me, I feel like the best literature in Pakistan is still being written in regional languages.
Mhm.
Most of us just don't have access to them because a lot of people don't read them.
So the
Uh,
key is really to get translation. We had a translator on when I was doing this show in a VR world called Sansar. There was a two translators were on. They were translating from Arabic, various languages, other languages, and that seemed to me the key. That really people need to go out and translate good stuff. So it gets
Absolutely,
yeah.
I would agree. I would agree.
Yeah. Um, Fantastic. The book displays here, and for the third time, we would like to observe you uh, falling off the stage. We actually don't have a stage today. City of Red Midnight. What else do we know? Do we need to know about the setup of this excerpt?
Yes, a little bit on this one. So, in this excerpt, as you were saying, so these are a bunch of artists who have just flown in from the US to Lahore for Lahore Comic Con. And now they're sitting at this tea house where kind of like it's called a chai khana, a tea house or like a coffee shop. And they're sitting and drinking tea and chatting when this funny looking dude just shows up and sits down next to them and says, how are you guys doing? My name is Baba Kahani. I'm a teller of the or I'm a devotee of the oral storytelling tradition. And now, would you like a demonstration of how I tell oral stories? An
Hmm.
art that I have learned from this oldest family of Peshawar's famed bazaar of storytellers. And so they order him some yellow cake and tea, and they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so Baba Kahani starts telling them a story.
And he's a pretty pushy guy. He just goes there and he tells the story. I, one more question before you start. They refer to him, or he's referred to as, I wrote this down as Gorai Sahib
So
or
Gore
Gori.
Gore is like gringo.
Ah, okay,
So
that's what it
Gore
is.
Gore Sahib, he's saying foreigners. So
Uh-huh.
listen, my new Gore friends, my new foreigner friends. So so Baba Kahani is about to tell the story, and here we go. Listen, my new Gore friends, cried Baba Kahani, rising to his feet, becoming taller by the act, as I tell you a story first told by the sages of Samarkand, buried in the annals of history, lost to centuries of marauding and pillaging, then revived in the rumors of the unlettered, the street sons who seeded it into the bosoms of the troubadours, and finally passed it to us through the songs of those sweet lipped. Oh, a time when stars and sorcerers ruled the fate of man. This is a story of a land well removed from us, yet so close you could almost reach out and pluck its pearls, like our prophet, midst a divine trance, once parted the world's veil and nearly plucked a pomegranate from a tree of heaven. Baba Kahani sighed. His hands drew toward his mouth, forming a prayer bowl, then flew forth, coming apart, as if releasing the subtlest of enchantments into the evening. Listen, listen, my dear Gore Sahibs, the storyteller whisper chanted. Now, with your permission, I recount to you Part 2, the marvelous tale of Taimur the trickster and the moon mad roses. It has reached me, my friends, that there once lived in the god guarded city of old Lahore a trickster named Taimur. This Taimur was from a family of apothecaries and hakims. He made a living by selling medicines, sherbets, and potions out of his ancestral shop, the Davakhana of empathy. But unbeknownst to his neighbors, Taimur had mastered the arts of subterfuge, illusion, guile, and disguise. Temur was half orphaned in his mother's womb after his father fell from a horse and broke his neck. As a consequence, Temur was a wild, sibling-less child, the bane of his mother's existence, who gathered fame and curses around the neighborhood by squeezing through skylights and chimneys no wider than a man's hand. Look, look, O mother of Temur! Women would shout after him as he sped down the street with the stolen chicken leg neath his vest. There goes your thief again! Oh, if you can't take care of him, next time I will box his ears and redden his bottom for you. As a grown man, Taimur's many gifts and preoccupations, including changing gold coins into tobacco leaves, replacing penned cattle with confused old men, and climbing up the sides of tall buildings without a handhold. Taimur was careful to limit his practice of these interests to nighttime or to other cities where he was less apt to be recognized. Yet one delight he found irresistible, which by its very nature had to be indulged closer to home, was to make fools of rich merchants who passed through the cities of old Lahore in search of Red Street. This way, gentle sirs, Taimur would cry, disguised as a fakir, after accosting them in Anarkali or by the blacksmith's gate. Follow me, and I shall take you to the alley that hides the opening to the wretched horrors of Red Street. Right you are, sir, the very one. Thus cajoling and enticing, Timur would lead these men down twisting streets until they reached narrow alleys impenetrable to their horses. The men would be forced to dismount, and as they did, Temur would pickpocket their purses and steal their rings and leave them yelling at a shadow, disappearing fast into the maze of back streets. Now, of course, you've heard the legend of Red Street and its claim to eminence. No, my august hosts? Indeed, and the mysterious epidemic that spread like an ill rumor through northern India? Well, it happened thus, my dear sirs and madams, that there came a time when from Lahore to Lucknow the families of idolaters and iconoclasts alike were gripped by a gruesome sickness. Their women folk began to turn. Between the ages of 12 and 40, these unfortunates suddenly became vicious, venomous, and vile. Far from comforting their hard-working men, fetching them food when they returned home late at night, cutting them slices of mangoes, or pressing their sore legs, these wretches, were they berated even gently for good cause, would seize and fling the nearest pot or bucket filled with the day's garbage at the heads of their poor husbands, their earthly gods. "May your face be blackened forever, you swine faced dwarf!" shouted one woman at the master of a household. "May your mother turn inside out, then squeeze you back in!" yelled another. Some clawed at the men's faces, others kicked them in their ball sacks. A few went so thoroughly insane that they ripped their chadars and lifted their dresses and dashed into the street, lighting up the mohallas with the moons of their bountiful behinds. Ah, what dismay they caused! What horror they wrought into the hearts of their loved ones! "Would that the earth had devoured me," wept one such man, "before this evil should have come to my home! Would that the sky had swallowed me!" "Oh, why had it to be me?" groaned another. "Why mine?" Strange, however, and noticed soon by the menfolk, was that this madness occurred for only a few days every month, usually around the lunar 14th. Come daybreak of the third or fourth day, the women would return to normalcy, their demeanors placid and their habits docile. They would, in short, again become the homemakers, peacemakers, mohalla caretakers, and keepers of gossip they were known to be. Inevitably, they were sat down, probed, and prodded by their men and elders, mothers and grandmothers, among whom were some impertinent spinsters who said they didn't care and would welcome a little insanity themselves. Slowly but surely, a disturbing wild tale emerged, which made many a heart shiver and many a pair of hands come together in prayer, for none wished to have such a terror visited upon their household. Notably chronicled too was the fact that each woman described arriving at her strange destination the same way on the same night, although the distance between the affected houses was such that the fastest Arabian horse couldn't cross it in a month. The following is the tale the women, later referred to as the moon mad roses, told their men. A tale Temur the trickster knew well and used to his advantage in his dealings with foolish merchants. And with your gracious permission, I shall now relate it to you. It has reached me, my auspicious friends, that one of the men said to his youthful spouse, "What happens to you every month that you aggrieve me so?" That fair woman replied, "My dear husband, may my soul be sacrificed for you." Part 3: The Romance of the Red Road and the One Who Called the Travelers Upon It. I'm going to stop right here.
All right. This is Usman Malik reading from a book, and he didn't give us a trigger warning. Now, did you get into hot water about this?
Actually, so there were maybe a couple of people who didn't quite read the story all the way to the end. This story actually came about as a feminist response to a very misogynistic Arabian Nights story.
Hmm.
The story is called Maruf the Cobbler. And one of the lines in the original Arabian Nights story was Maruf the Cobbler and his wife, whom the story calls Fatma the Dung. And it pissed me so much
Like
that
a
I was
dung
like, you
beetle.
know what? I want to tell Fatma's story. So the story is written in a way that it kind of sounds like it's very misogynistic, but then as the story goes on, you realize what's really happening. Is it's
Well, and
Fatma's
also it's
story.
the storyteller is telling the stories to these guys at the airport right now, still, right? So that's kind of where we're at.
Exactly. And
Hmm.
as the story goes on, you discover what the story is really about. So this was a story that was actually up for the Locus Award and the UG Foster Award.
Really, really cool. We gotta wrap it. Thank you so much, Usman. You can sit back down. I know you like standing because of your and powering towering physique. You want to display it here for us
I'm
little
trying to figure
little
out how to.
guys.
I don't know how to. Well, let's see.
Click the chair.
That's right. I gotta zoom out. Oh,
Oh no, you're going close to the audience. The audience is getting really afraid here. Um,
okay,
thank you
there
so
we go.
much, Usman
Oh,
Malik. This was absolutely wonderful. Oh, look, a lot of hearts are being thrown
oh,
into the air for your your gratification here. This is a sign of love. This audience loves you. Shiloh says, "Stay well, be safe, namaste." Usman, thank you so much, audience. You can stick around and befriend each other and hang out. Uh, we're going to wrap the live stream. Um, Please go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Draxtor. You can subscribe there. Make sure to like the video and spread the word. And I'm going to run through our credit slides here. The Second Life Book Club happens every Wednesday at 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock Second Life time, which is the same as Pacific time. Email is slbookclub@draxtor.com, and you can send suggestions for authors there. You can send critique there. Um, you can send also praise for me or the team. The show is produced by Isabel Sharon, Shyla the Super Gecko, and myself, location manager, master builder, Ruby Geek. Today, together with Isabel and Ruby built this location together. Wonderful location. It will stay. We're not going to dismantle it. Avatars made by Ruby, researched by Shyla. Special thanks, Marianne, Arduin, Theanine, AJ, McDowell, Brett Linden, Patch Linden, all the moles over at Linden Lab. And again, if you want to get in touch, slbookclub@dragster.com. Your pictures, you can share them on Flickr. The sandwich boards around the islands. We have 3 islands. Um, there's teleportation devices everywhere, and you can check on the sandwich boards how to find the Flickr and the Discord. Do not forget to tip our volunteer staff, please. There's a tip jar, the little dragon sculpture here leaning against the column, and he is eating your Linden dollars. So if you have Linden dollars, if you can afford it, please give. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Any last words, Usman? Did you enjoy your stay here despite having to get up and sit down so many times?
I enjoyed it very much, and the audience were great, and you guys are great. Thank you so much for having me.
And you were on call and nothing happened, so that's pretty good, I guess. That will be something. Next time, if you're on a mobile VR headset, you can still be with us in the book club while you're going into surgery.
That's right.
Next week, the author is Naomi Booth. Her latest book is Exit Management. It's literary, crime, and horror adjacent. Uh, I should have asked Usman what he understands literary fiction is versus other fiction, but we'll save that for next time. Naomi Booth is coming next week, November 10th, 12 o'clock, right here on the Second Life Book Club. Goodbye.